Seances have a long history of intrigue, but what is the dark truth behind these spiritual practices? Well, today we're going to delve into the mystery of seances and learn about their origins and evolutions over the years. From necromancy to the spiritualist movement, let's explore the secrets behind this intriguing practice and see how it has affected us in modern day. The issue with seances truly lies in deciphering whether they are true connections to the afterlife or elaborate hoaxes designed to just deceive. One thing we do know, as history progresses, more and more things about mediums and seances are being debunked. So, are there even any real mediums? How can people decipher who is genuine and who's just trying to make money off pulling on the heartstrings of people? But hold on, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. History always comes first in this show. So we'll get into the discussion of what's real and not real in today's modern day in the last section of this video. So as I mentioned in previous videos, I want to try to make these videos not too long. I want to try to keep them kind of under an hour if we can. So after a bit of research, I decided to break down the topic of history of seances into 4 areas. Number 1, necromancy. This is from ancient Egypt to Rome to the Middle Ages to the Renaissance. Number 2, Victorian Spiritualist Movement. This is when the word seance was truly created and when the craze of a seance began. Number 3, the Great Debunking. This is the era after the Victorian craze spiritualist movement, sort of end 19th century through much of the 20th century. This is when a lot of science, magicians, things like that were kind of coming out and debunking a lot of things and a lot of people for what they were, which were just scammers. And number 4, we're going to talk about modern day. Because seances did get a bit of a reinvigoration when it came to TV. 90s television kind of brought them back. And with that came a whole different kind of era for seances. And that is where we are now. All right, so let's get started. Necromancy. The word as we know it was adapted from Latin necromantia, which means divination through a dead body. However, the practice dates further back. It seems this word was created based on past historical record. Many scholars believe necromancy evolved from shamanistic practices in small tribes. As humans began to grow into larger settlements and grand cities, complex religions were developed, and the act of speaking with the dead also evolved. So where do we begin? It's hard to really narrow down a specific year, so we're just gonna kind of talk about things before the Roman Empire started. Because when the Roman Empire started is sort of when Christianity, Catholicism, and stuff kind of started taking off. So we're going to talk about the pre-Roman era. So this is anything before 31 BC. There are records of the practice of talking with the dead in ancient Egypt, Babylonia, Greece, Etruria, Rome, and China. The people who would speak with the dead were in general terms seers or sorcerers. So let's take a brief look at some of the writings at this time. The Greek geographer Strabo wrote a manuscript called Geographica. It is not known precisely when Strabo's Geographica was written, but he was born in 64-63 BC and he died in 24 AD. So his accounts are from a very ancient time because it's all based around things he experienced through his life, stories he heard as he traveled. This manuscript details a history of people and places from around the world. And the world at that time, remember, this is ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, so we're kind of talking on the eastern side of the world. Strabo writes about diviners of the dead in Persia, and Menzazu in Babylonia, and the spirits they raised were called Myuu. In China, 3rd century BC to 5th century AD, there were Fangxi method masters, who were like sorcerers, astrologers, seers, etc. They performed medium healing, having spirits come help heal the sick, usually spirits of their ancestors. So family members who died, who were taking care of the living family members is the idea of the whole thing. When it came to written works of entertainment, the oldest literary account of necromancy is found in Homer's Odyssey, written in 8th or 7th century BC. Odysseus has Circe, a sorceress, help him travel to the underworld in order to get information about his voyage home. He has to raise spirits of the dead to ask them for help on getting home. The passage in this story contains many very descriptive and elaborate rituals, ingredients, sacrifices, etc. for speaking with the dead. Some scholars theorize that this was written based on real-life accounts of necromancers. Additionally, in 8 AD, There's a written work called Metamorphoses, written by Ovid, and it speaks of a marketplace in the underworld where the dead convene to exchange news and gossip. It is important to point something out, though. Many seers and sorcerers at this time, archaeologists have discovered, they were living in caves where toxic fumes from certain things were making them hallucinate. As well, some of the shamanistic practices of drinking certain teas from plants or eating certain items also played a role. A good chunk of the spiritualism in ancient times was being affected by psychoactive substances. And not to say that psychoactive substances don't open up a world to us that maybe we don't understand unless we're under the influence. I mean, there is the idea that it just sort of releases our bond of the world around us and we see things for what they really are. So there is an argument to be made on it from a spiritualist aspect of it. I myself, as someone who have done a lot of these psychoactive substances, I can definitely understand why it would feel like a spiritual enlightening or experience. So this is just a really quick summary of everything that was pre-Roman era, so everything before 31 BC. We're going to move into the Roman era because, again, I don't want this video to be too long, so I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on everything from ancient cultures. So we're going to kind of work through really quickly some of the ancient history. Then we're going to get into very detailed history of the Victorian era, and then we'll talk about the modern day. Okay, so 31 BC and on, essentially from ancient Rome to the medieval to Renaissance era until we hit the Victorian era, we're going to kind of talk about now. Necromancer practices continued up until the rise of Rome in 31 BC when Christianity began to grow. Israelites at that time called necromancers bone conjurers, and it was a prohibited practice. So Christianity likely began adopting the same aversion to people who could speak with the dead as the one God religion took hold in the dominant world at the time. Once the church was in full force through the Middle Ages and Renaissance eras, it was written that only God was capable of resurrection. They turned the practice of necromancy on its head by denouncing it and saying that these people were calling for demons, not spirits of loved ones. The practice became known explicitly as maleficium, and the Catholic Church condemned it. If there was a practitioner in some kind of dark arts, which at the time was anything from astrology to necromancy to divination, these practitioners were most often members of the Christian or Catholic clergy, so the church could control the narrative and further their hold on the crown, as many of these clergymen did work to counsel kings and leaders. Most of them also had knowledge of how to perform exorcisms, and rituals could be construed as prayers rather than spells underneath the church. There are some detailed accounts of what necromancy accomplished during this time. Practitioners believed they could accomplish three things: manipulation of a person's will, illusions, and gaining knowledge. The practitioners did this by calling demons and requesting the demon services to perform these acts. There's nothing more substantial to occur in the area of speaking with the dead for some centuries as the church held the narrative. But soon on the horizon was a huge culmination, and this would create the biggest spiritual craze of all time. So, can you guess what the culmination of events that was about to happen? It's coming up in our next section of Victorian Spiritualist Craze. So, keep watching, and we're going to get into it. Welcome to the Victorian era, the latter 1800s. Named the Victorian era as this was the era Queen Victoria held the throne. Victorian spiritualism was all the craze, and it really began with a farmhouse in Hydesville, New York in 1848. The family reported having many supernatural events occurring. They kept hearing raps and taps at night. It was said that Kate Fox, the daughter, created a communication code using the raps and Kate guiding the spirit so they could speak together. She then said the spirit was a man who was murdered in the home. Thus, the practice of sitting and speaking with spirits was born from there on. The word seance, created around 1790, is actually French for session or to sit. So these spirit sittings adopted the French word seance. Kate Fox and Maggie Fox quickly became the popular mediums during this time. In November 1849, the Fox sisters went to the Corinthian Hall in Rochester and demonstrated their ability to speak with spirits. This was the first demonstration of spiritualism held before a paying public, and it birthed a long history of public medium events in the US and the worldwide. Spiritualism attracted people from different social classes, including Queen Victoria herself. It offered a way to communicate with dead loved ones. Interestingly enough, at the time, women were considered the better mediums because they were regarded as being more spiritual and better communicators. A call for women's rights was slowly developing through the spiritualists as well. With a female monarch and this movement, women felt like they were gaining some sort of control over their future again. During a time when there was such gender disparity, it is no wonder the spiritualism movement took hold so quickly. It was silently creating a means of escaping rigid 19th century class and gender norms, and it was doing so quietly without attacking the status quo. One of the most famous Victorian mediums in Europe was Florence Cook. She materialized herself during sessions and was very good at parlor tricks. One time it is said that she levitated herself above the people at the table and her clothes fell to the ground. She also flirted and kissed her patrons while under the control of a spirit. She was essentially the ultimate showman. So, back to the question I asked earlier. What culmination of events led to such a huge popularity in the Victorian Spiritualist movement? Well, I gave you the first part to start, would be the female monarch and women sort of taking control of their futures again. That was important. But what really made these seances go the extra mile? What helped them be so flashy and made them turn into a big show? Have you figured it out yet? Well, technology, of course. Advances in science led to the discovery of a number of things at the time. Most notable is electricity, and with magnetism, these two unseen forces made the idea of communicating with the spirits seem scientifically plausible. It was like invisible technology was being created and invisible things were happening that people couldn't see with their own eyes. So spirits must be real if you're able to light a light bulb from a distance too, without realizing like what is actually making it work, because people at the time didn't truly understand everything. However, as we look back, we can see as new technology shows up, people can be tricked at first until they truly understand it. Look, for example, at modern day deepfakes made with AI. It's comparable to how frauds saw new technology and decided to use it to create fantastical seances with special effects and amazing results in the eyes of the patrons at the time. And it wasn't just electricity. Photography was a growing technology, and some photographers created some of the craziest deepfakes of ghosts and ectoplasm for the Victorian era people at the time. Not to mention, the telephone was like disembodied voices to the people that it was so new to. Superhuman speed of the railway, near instantaneous communication through telegraph wires. Time and distance didn't seem to matter as much because of all the modern technology that was transforming everyone's daily life. It was like living in an uncanny valley. And the people at the time, it was just a huge discovery and intrigue, and people were trying to understand what's happening around them. So of course they believed that there could be invisible spirits, because look at all these other invisible things that are showing up in their life right now. Most people also didn't even care that the church was condemning it. And they were, by the way. There were occasional mobs and acts of violence out of fear that it was an evil act and they were speaking with demons. A quote here, a decree at the Holy Office of the Roman Catholic Church in 1898 condemned spiritualist practice, though it approved of legitimate scientific investigation of related phenomena. Both Protestant and Catholic bodies released a steady stream of anti-spiritualist literature at the time. But the Victorians were haunted and delighted by the supernatural. It was the new entertainment for this era, like TV shows and movies for us in modern day. Additionally, this is the time that birthed some of the most notable horror writers, such as Bram Stoker and Mary Shelley. Horror was the new thing. It was just so popular and intriguing to people. I will briefly mention the Fox Sisters Confession as well. It actually didn't do much to stop the spiritualist movement at the time, but it's an important part of information in the history of seances, as it is something to remind ourselves of as we move forward in time. In 1888, Maggie Fox admitted their fraud and proved how they did it. She showed the cracking of the toe joint and the noise it could make on command as needed. A confession was even signed by her. Later on, however, Maggie did recant the confession, but she was never able to book paying patrons after that. But the spiritualism movement was still growing strong, and this confession made no difference in affecting how people saw mediums and spiritualists at the time. But what was really going on here? What were all of these parlor tricks anyway? Many mediums were really just excellent stage magicians. tapping under tables, hidden compartments, noisemakers, people controlling ropes and pulleys, the Fox sisters using their double joints to create taps. And then there was just really good acting. Some mediums went into trance-like states, some pretended to have their bodies taken over, and they acted like the spirit. The main takeaway though, this was all just parlor tricks. But back then, people didn't know. At least for a time they didn't know. Eventually they figured it out with the help of some people. Up next, I'll show you some of the techniques that some of the mediums used back then and how they were debunked. So keep watching to learn the secrets of the Victorian era mediums. And if you are enjoying yourself, don't forget, hit that subscribe button. It helps the channel out. Those who placed their hopes in Victorian mediums were eventually destined for disappointment. One by one, the mediums were discovered to be fraudsters. So how were they all being outed? Well, simple. Stage magicians. Magicians finally got fed up and started proving each medium, one by one, was using stage magic techniques just to put on a show. In the 20th century, the magicians Milbourne Christopher and James Randi took a lot of the lead on debunking fake mediums, and soon after, other researchers and magicians began aiding the cause and exposing fraudsters for what they were. Researchers Frank Podmore of the Society of Psychical Research, Harry Price of the National Laboratory of Psychical Research, the professor of stage magicians John Neville, and Harry Houdini even hopped on to help. Harry Price we did talk about in our last episode of Paranormal History, as he was the first ghost hunter to employ scientific method and the first person to start using gadgets to try and prove a haunting. If you want to learn more about him, definitely check out the video that I will be linking. Harry Price was also an ex-magician. It is interesting to note that a number of the debunkers were still believers in spirits, but they just didn't like that fraudsters were taking advantage of people who were sad and grieving at the time. That's why they took up the mantle to actually debunk them. All right, so let's take a look at some of the popular Victorian era techniques and tools that mediums were using and how they were debunked. All right, first up, slate writing. Slate writing was pretty popular. It consisted of essentially like two chalkboards bound together that when opened were said to reveal a message by the spirits. There was a lot of ways that you could fake this, and it was all kind of based on how they were binding them together, whether they were hiding them under the table, whether they were doing sleight of hand, things like that. It came down to a lot of distracting of the patrons, holding their hands, like physically moving their hands around and holding them to distract them. Some even, they had a piece of slate on a ring finger and they were holding it under the table and writing. Some people wrote on it with their feet. They learned how to write with slate with their feet. Some also just replaced the slates because they were easy to come by at the time, and they just distracted the patron, and the patron didn't notice. There was also another method as well where someone would write an answer or draw out something on like a wet gauze with slate, and they would put it on the slate board. It would dry up, and they would use sleight of hand to remove the gauze and reveal that the slate board drew this very particular thing or wrote this very detailed thing, and all it did was it transferred the slate from the gauze onto the board itself. So that was another very popular thing that was going on. So slate was very easy to maneuver around, to defraud. There was a lot of different ways that they did this. An offshoot of this also was the pencil planchette. Similar to a Ouija board, the planchette, simple, put a pencil attached in a planchette. Planchette's like the part with the Ouija board. Pencil makes contact with the paper and writes out messages on pieces of paper. Again, this is just something that they put their hands on and they move around like the Ouija board, so they can kind of control what the pencil's doing. But you know, people wanted to believe, right? So they fell for this stuff. It's the same with how the Ouija board worked, right? The medium would just move the actual planchette around the Ouija board to spell out a message. But the biggest one was the table tricks. These are like the really popular things at the time. There's a few different things. There was table turning and there was table tilting, just even moving of the table. But the table turning is they had these big round tables, and the tables had the alphabet and stuff written on them. And the table would turn to spell out things that the spirit was saying. And again, this was just people are unconsciously moving the table themselves by way of something called the ID motor response, or the medium was actually just leading the table to actually write these things out. Seance tables, they were special lightweight tables. They were able to rotate, float, levitate when spirits were present, all this other stuff. There's a lot of very interesting things out there that sort of explains how they did some of their stuff. There was devices that mediums would wear on their wrists that had metal pieces that would help lift the table. The tables were also able to be lifted in other ways. There was helpers and things too. There's lots of different ways that these tables were sort of used to fraud people and like convince them that there was a ghost in the room. And the table was the most fantastical thing at the beginning there that people were using. Up next, we have our tapping on the table, using your toe to actually make a noise like the Fox sisters did. And translation was a thing where they would read out the alphabet and then it would tap at the letter that they wanted them to stop at. And then that would spell out a word. For those of you paranormal lovers on YouTube, I think that might sound familiar to you, and we'll get to that. Up next, the next thing, spirit trumpets. I don't really know why these were so believed, but like apparently most of the time the medium would just hold the trumpet up to their mouth and say that the spirits were talking through them under their voice. So they would just whisper into this homemade trumpet of metal. People just believed it was spirits. There's some accounts saying that trumpets were flying around the room and they were whispering themselves, but it's very likely that there was actually just a helper who is like behind a hidden wall or something like that, or a curtain, who had their own trumpet, because it did help amplify a voice, and they were just doing it from behind the curtain. So it's very possible that's a lot of what it was. There's also talk that there was a rubber hose connecting the trumpet to a manifestation cabinet. It could be threaded underneath the carpet, keeping things out of sight so people could talk through the trumpet through a rubber hose itself. There's a lot of different ways that this can be faked. Okay, up next, the next one is materializations. This was literally just a spirit would materialize himself in the room, and it was really just helpers and actors that were working with the medium. They dress up, look scary and stuff, kind of stand like in a shadow, and she would say that it was a ghost, but it was just a person who was playing a role. Then you have your sealed letter writing. This one's popular too. Some people may, depending on your age, you may have seen clips of it from the Ed McMahon show, which is like a really old variety show from like way back in the day. But there would be a message written in the envelope from an audience member, and then the audience would like be like, yeah, that was what I wrote, and then everyone would freak out. So a very popular thing that they would do for that is they'd gather all the envelopes up. They'd have one envelope with a message that was written by a plant in the room, right? So as someone that they knew what the message was, they would take sleight of hand, and they would take that envelope that was written by the plant, put it at the bottom of the list, or put it underneath their table, or like whatever it was. And what they would do is they would start the envelope by opening it up and reading a message that was written by someone in the audience. So the first thing that they would guess in an envelope, they would already know the answer because they have a plant in the audience. They'd open up the envelope, they'd read it back and be like, yep, that's what it said. And then the audience member would be freaking out. And then that way, then they read the next message because they opened the audience members' envelopes before they guessed it. So that's a common way that they would do it. Essentially, the person that's performing this is one ahead in the envelope stack at all times. Other methods are sleight of hand, quick palming of notes and things of that nature too. So very much a lot of sleight of hand, just like magicians. All right, the next thing on the list that the mediums would do back then are spirit cabinets. Spirit cabinets were portable closets in which the mediums they went inside of them, often bound with ropes or different things like that to prevent them from manipulating different tools. They would enter these cabinets, they would have people check them to make sure that they have the full trust of the audience. So are the ropes strong? Like, this is just like the magicians do. They would get inside the cabinets, they'd undo themselves from the ropes, and then they would do stuff from the cabinet. And that would look amazing, like there was stuff happening all over the room, and that the medium was inside the cabinet, like channeling the spirit, but the medium was tied up, so there's no way that they could be controlling any of these things. So this was a very common parlor trick that was done with mediums that made the show just even more fantastical than what it already was to the people. We did touch on it briefly. I will put it on the list here. Ouija boards. I personally don't like using them. I think that they have like bad connotations attached to them. But for people that want to fraud people, it's a really easy way to fraud people because you can just control where the planchette is moving and you just spell out whatever you want on the Ouija board. So it's a really easy way to defraud people. All right, the next one, again, a bit of acting, channeling the spirit. They would kind of learn a little bit about the spirit. They would get an idea of how the spirit was when they talk to the family, and they channel it and they just act. They pretend they're the spirit, and they're just really good actors. So the ones that were really good at channeling, they were the ones that were like the really good actors and really good showmans. Next up on the list, ectoplasm. Most of the time it was like gauze, or in some cases goat stomach, or there's some talk that it was bodily fluids, but they would spew it from their mouths, like the medium would spew it from the mouths or behind the ear or from anywhere. They would use squirt bottles, things like it was weird, but this was a popular thing. People got really into seeing ectoplasm oozing from their mediums. It was said to be part of the veil that was separating the material world from the spirit world. So like it was all part of like the show of like, hey, I'm pushing through the veil. Look at this ectoplasm here. There was a very popular medium who was known for using it a lot, and her name is Martha Baroque, also known as Eva C. or Eva Carreri. She actually stuffed them with muslin, which is like a fabric, but sometimes she added photos from newspapers for a bit of personality, except one time she actually got caught because they recognized a photo that didn't make sense. It was an actress or something in the paper at the time, and it didn't make sense to the particular reading that she was doing, and that exposed her. So she pushed herself too far on that one. The next item on the list, spirit photography. You know, one of the benefits of photography is shows the world proof someone's actually there. So this is like a big thing. A lot of the spirit photographers were actually men, but they worked with the mediums, and they just used like camera trickery, things like overexposure, double exposure, lots of different ways that they kind of played with the camera back then, because people didn't really know how cameras worked. So they were just like, you know, assuming that the photographer was being truthful with them with these things. But it was kind of like photographers figured out, oh shoot, you know, my photo got messed up because of this. Why did my photo get messed up? They eventually like learn, oh, this is how camera works. Oh, okay, this can do this. Oh, I can actually double expose onto a piece of paper. Oh, okay. And then they were like, oh, well, I'm going to use this to like defraud people. This is a good way to pretend that there's a spirit standing beside someone. And that's sort of where the spirit photography was kind of born from there. This stuff was highly debunked by a lot of different people. I know Price actually debunked a lot of the spirit photographers over the years, so eventually they got their comeuppance on it. There's another popular one, a fire test, where the medium will try to like hurt themselves, burn themselves over fire or coals, things like that. And they would be impervious to the heat. They wouldn't get hurt. So the reason that they were able to pull this off without like freaking out and hurting themselves was pretty much chemistry. They used things like camphor gum, whiskey, quicksilver, liquid storax, things like that to give a fireproof sort of hand or finger or whatever they were doing. And it would soak up the flame, and they would learn like when they have to pull it out before like it uses it all up, and then they burn themselves. So it was kind of like a bit of practice, but definitely not one you should try at home. I'm sure they burnt themselves a lot before they actually got the recipe right. So that is a list of some of the common used things and parlor tricks that were going on at the time, and ways that they were debunked by magicians and scientists and researchers and things like that. Now let's talk about modern day. The 20th century brought with it the idea of incorporating the scientific method into ghost hunting. And thus, for a time, it made the public question any remaining mediums and spiritualists, as between magicians and scientific researchers, much of the craft of a seance was debunked. Yet, today's day and age, we see a lot of mediums and seances still going on. So how do we get back to this point? Well, it goes back to humans want to believe in something after life. They want to be able to talk to their loved ones, things like that. But the biggest thing with modern day, like today's day and age, is TV. TV played a big role in having a big bounce back of this kind of mediumship and seances. The 90s brought with it some famous mediums which were on TV. If you're really young, you might not remember these people, but I will just go through a couple of them. Sylvia Browne, big psychic medium from back on the day. She was featured in a number of shows. The Montel show was the big one that she was on. She purported to have helped the police solve a lot of unsolved crimes. I'm just going to read you a quote from, the question is, was anything actually true? So I'm just going to read you a quote from the Skeptical Inquirer. In 2010, the Skeptical Inquirer published a detailed 3-year study by Ryan Schaefer and Agatha, I'm going to mispronounce this, Jadwiskaya, apologies, that examined Browne's predictions about missing persons and murder cases. Despite her repeated claims to be more than 85% correct, the study reported that Browne has not even been mostly correct in a single case. The study compared Browne's televised statements about 115 cases with newspaper reports and found that 25 of the cases where the actual outcome was known, she was completely wrong in every one. In the rest where the outcome was unknown, her predictions could not be substantiated. The study concluded that media outlets that repeatedly promoted Browne's work had no visible concern about whether she was untrustworthy or harmed people. If you're curious, go and do some more research on Sylvia Browne. Take a look at some of the links I provide towards the quote of the article as well. It's really sad, some of the cases, like at the time, like we didn't really know, but now time has passed, so we know. But like she told some people on TV that their missing children were dead and they weren't dead. And like one mom, like, you know, she died shortly after Sylvia telling her that, if you know what I mean. And the kid turned up like a couple years later. Like it's one thing to like just give people hope, to just be a positive psychic and just say positive things and give people hope. Then that's not really so bad in the end. You're just trying to make people feel better. But she was giving people negative readings and negative information. And that negative stuff, like that, just it's wrong. It affected people's lives. These are the type of fraudsters that are an issue. These are the ones that can damage people forever and can cause irreparable harm. So she's just one of the big ones. There was a lot of psychics back then, obviously, and there was like a whole psychic network. You call 900 number and they charge you whatever for it. And I won't get into that one. But I am going to talk about the next big medium show that there was. And this one was, I think, even maybe in the 2000s. Let me just double check. Actually, yeah, it started in the year 2000. He was a bit newer than Sylvia Browne. She was kind of like going on the downturn there, and then he was kind of coming up. So let's talk about his show. One of the biggest medium TV shows was called Crossing Over with John Edward. This was strictly just a TV show where a medium was talking to spirits, saying the spirits were talking to him, and he was talking to the audience and relaying messages, right? He was just a mentalist, though. If you're unsure what that is, a mentalist, just someone who performs to an audience and appear to demonstrate very intuitive abilities, things of that nature. They're just really good at reading people and doing cold and hot reads of audiences. So anyways, John, he used a mentalist crowd surfing technique to convince the audience that he was speaking with dead relatives of the audience. He performs mentalist techniques of hot reading and cold reading, in which one respectively uses prior knowledge or array of quick and sometimes general guesses to create impressions of psychic abilities. And sometimes there's even a planted audience member. There were rumors, I couldn't really find like substantiated, but at the time I remember hearing rumors that he had microphones set up in like the lobbies or something, listening to the audience members as they were waiting to come in. And that information would be fed to him and he would sort of feed off that. But definitely the way the show is designed, there's definitely an opportunity for planted audience members, for sure. 100%. I would honestly recommend watch the TV show called The Mentalist. The character's name is Patrick Jane. He's a mentalist in it. It explains how a lot of these tricks are done. It even explains how a lot of these medium tricks were done as well. I tried to find a certain scene in the show where he's cold reading an audience, and this was before he started work for the FBI as like an official mentalist, before he like said that he was a fraud and, you know, worked for the FBI. I was having trouble finding the scene to show you, but if it's something that does interest you and if you haven't watched The Mentalist yet, it's a very good show, by the way. So I definitely recommend watching it. Essentially, he's someone who said he was a psychic and a medium. His father grew up grifting, so he learned how to grift. He pushed the wrong buttons. A serial killer got upset with him, killed his family. He came out as being a fraud, and then he started helping the FBI because he's very good at reading people. Right? That's what mentalists are. They're able to read all the little things, just like the other show, Psych, right? Psych is a funny version of a mentalist. Patrick Jane, the Mentalist TV show, is a more serious version of it. It's not really like spoilers or anything. This all happens like the first episode. It explains how Patrick Jane got to working with the FBI. So definitely go check it out. I do recommend it. Very good show. Now, lastly, in the 90s, early 2000s, a lot of ghost hunter TV shows were becoming popular. And this goes back to last week's episode in Paranormal History, how a lot of these TV shows from the 90s kind of exploded a lot of the scientific side of ghost hunting and got it out to a wider audience, because then the internet was sort of born on top of all these things. At the time when all these shows and stuff were out, the internet was starting, and this was affecting how we are today now with all this information. So a lot of these ghost hunter TV shows had like a medium here or there that they would feature. Eventually, mediums actually got their own shows too based around ghost hunting. So it wasn't about reading an audience. They would actually go into like a haunted area and give their, feedback on what's going on. So 90s kind of rebooted this whole psychic and medium interest in the people. And these shows influenced the amateur ghost hunter, medium, psychic, whatever of today, which a lot of them are posting on YouTube. But there are some that are just friends. They go out together, and that's fine. And people that just want to help people, and that's fine too. The issue comes where there's the fraudster ones that are making up stuff to make money, and they're pulling at the heartstrings of people, and they're not really telling the truth. Or, if you are making it up and you just want to make money off people, don't be like negative and tell people that their children are dead. Like that. It just seems really evil to do that. Like, I just don't know how someone could kind of reach that point, So let's talk about a recent drama that's modern day news that relates back to the Fox sisters. Unless you're living under a rock, if you're watching this and you're on YouTube and you're into paranormal stuff, you would know about Cody and Satori. You know about the Cody and Satori drama. Let's just touch on that. I have no idea if they take down videos that criticize them at all. I don't know if it's going to affect this video. We'll see what happens if I end up having to edit out. I'm not too sure. I'm not that big of a YouTuber, so like maybe they won't notice. I don't really know what their reaction to things are like quite yet. It's hard to see. We'll see what happens with it. Cody and Satori. Interestingly enough, if you don't know, Satori is actually the daughter of the guy who runs TAPS, which is the big first like ghost hunter science-based TV show that was around in I think the late 90s, early 2000s. What is really hilarious but also sad is they're using the tapping method that the Fox sisters did. It's just a bone in their foot, and they're using it to make tapping noises. Cody's clearly using a joint, like he's popping a joint in his foot. He's popping a joint somewhere in his body. And Satori reads the alphabet and spells out messages while he taps in response to the messages. He's very good at it. I'll give him that. He's able to adjust the sound of it, make it sound close or far away. They, of course, have been denying it, but there's literally a historical record of someone doing this to fake talking to spirits. It's like they thought, hey, it's been 100 years, so maybe no one will notice because it's been 100 years, and maybe someone will have forgotten what the Fox sisters have done, and I'm just going to do what the Fox sisters did because I'm able to do that too. Like, I don't know what they were thinking. Cody and Satori, they refuse to take off their shoes. They refuse to take off their socks. They won't let people see their feet while they're doing it. Satori says it's because she doesn't like feet people and they freak her out. She doesn't want her feet on the internet, which is a fair argument, except it's the only way that they're going to prove that they're real at this point, because they refuse to actually take off their shoes or anything, to take off their socks. And that's the only way that they're going to prove this. And it's the only thing that they refuse to do still. So we'll see where things go, but I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it's true. I think he's just popping a joint. He's just really good at it. Unfortunately, during the whole thing, they originally did kind of trick a couple YouTubers, big YouTube channels in the moment. They caught them up with their heartstrings. They talked to, family members were talking to them. It got them very emotional. And that's how they do this, right? They do research on somebody. They figure out something personal to them so that the person gets emotional and they aren't thinking logically about the situation. And they aren't thinking, hey, how could this be fake? Or how should we debunk this? Because they're so caught up in their emotions, they don't think about it. But after all the videos got released, that's when people were like, hey, this is just like the Fox sisters. And a bunch of people then started releasing videos saying, I can do it too. And they started showing how they were cracking the knuckle of their big toe to make these noises. So they got debunked very quickly. The YouTube channels that were featuring them really kind of took a bit of flack for it. And they were kind of quiet for a while. One of the channels did try to talk to them and ask them if they would take off they're the ones who asked them if they would take off their socks. And they were like, oh, I don't like feet people. And they're like, maybe one day they'll do it. Yeah, I don't see it happening. The other big channel who first showed up with them, with a big audience, the one who posted first, even though One channel was recorded before, I don't want to like mention names. Anyway, I think they kind of realized everything after the fact. They're young guys. I don't think that they know about the Fox sisters, but they kind of like learned, and they were kind of quiet for a while because of it all. So I think they're just trying to kind of distance themselves from Cody and Satori, which is what I would do. They're like a pile of hot garbage right now. You do not want to be associated with them if you're trying to be taken seriously at all. So I apologize if this video comes across negatively at all. That isn't my intention. My intention with this video is for us to just revisit history. Let's not make the same mistakes that we have in the past. It almost recently happened with the Cody and Satori thing, but then some older people who remember the Fox sisters and some people who knew how to do it themselves, they posted videos, they posted online, they said, no, this is fake. And then they explained why, and then they linked back to the Fox sisters. And this comes back to like history was almost forgotten, but not quite. So just remember, look back on the past so that we can make proper decisions for the current and for the future. Do you believe in psychics and mediums? What's your experience? Do you have any stories that you want to share? Definitely comment below. But if you've enjoyed this discussion, be sure to check out last week's video on ghost hunting science, where we do talk about price and we talk about the science behind ghost hunting. Also, if you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time, happy hunting.